Beth Miller, welcome back to Succession Stories. You are the first person to come back for a part two. How about that?
Oh, well, I feel honored. Thank you so much, Laurie. I've been looking forward to chatting with you today.
You and I have so much to talk about. You are obsessed with succession. And of course, the show is called Succession Stories. So we met last year. You had reached out and we recorded episode 36. You were episode 36. And we had a great conversation. We talked about issues surrounding succession planning and how business owners can avoid pressing mistakes. And so since that time, you've turned your experience into a book, your second book, which is called Replaceable, an obsession with succession. So congratulations on the launch. And thank you so much for being here. I look forward to talking with you about the book.
Oh, well, thank you, Laurie.
So let's start. So let's jump in. Why did you decide to write a book about succession?
Well, I was a Vistage chair for many years. So I worked with small business owners during their succession and through their succession. Some of them that had very successful exits, while others not so successful. And so during those lessons, I was thinking, gosh, it'd be really great to be able to sit down and write my learnings from these great individuals so that other small business owners wouldn't make the mistakes of some of the things that I saw and follow the path of those individuals that really were successful in their exit. So that was kind of how I had the idea. It was in the back of my mind for several years. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, wow, I've got some time now. Why don't I start writing the book? So I started, I think it was July of 2020. And it was launched in last month in September.
Yeah, it's a labor of love. And I'm holding it up here for anyone watching the video on YouTube. They can see the book. And, one of the most important roles of a leader is to think about succession, because the reality is 100% of us are going to leave our companies one day.
Yes, exactly.
And so how do you set up your team, your family, your successors? How do you set it up for that transition? And if a listener has listened to any other episode besides this one, they'll have heard this from me, which is, look, transitions are going to happen and change is going to happen. And so if we embrace that and we try to be proactive in thinking about what those options might be, some of those options might include selling the company. I don't say and advocate that they have to sell, but at least it certainly is an option. Yep. And creating those options is really what it's all about. Having more options to choose from should lead to a better outcome, hopefully. Yeah, and so for companies where the owner or the CEO is the most important person in that business, where we call it a hub and spoke challenge, where they are the ones answering all the questions, they're firefighting, and the business isn't set up for success to transfer. It's actually a worthless business.
That's correct. Exactly. Yep.
Have you seen that happen where an owner just could not separate from the business soon enough and ultimately it closed or it liquidated or it just had a failed succession?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, in the book, I actually have a story that I start out with a story of two companies. One that did the succession planning very successfully, and the other one that didn't. And the one that didn't was really controlling a lot of what was going on in the business, and could never really see what life was going to look like after the business. And that's one of the major roadblocks I see. This was a family business. And I mentioned that, I had been a Vistage chair. The group had worked with this individual for about a year saying, hey, you're getting older. You need to start planning your succession. And he did, but he didn't. It wasn't a strategic succession plan. He wasn't developing his people like he should. And sadly, I got a call on a Sunday morning that he had died of a heart attack. And what happened was 18 months later, that company just shut down. There was nobody prepared to take over the business. And it was really, really tragic.
That is tragic.
Yeah. Now the other guy really was very purposeful about planning for succession, and had identified a high potential to take over, and had started developing him. In fact, that individual was actually in my Vistage group. So at the point where he actually sold his business, he was only working in the business 1 day a week. And it wasn't a company that needed him. So he actually got full value up front. He had no earnout. And it was an all cash deal, which is very unusual.
And desirable.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So for people who don't know what an earnout is, it means that it's a commitment from the seller to stay on board, typically for, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year.
Right.
And a lot of times there's financial milestones tied to the earnout.
Yes.
So it could be on revenue, it could be on profit, it could be on other things. And so, it's advantageous for a seller to not have an earnout and to have an all-cash deal. So that is a good thing. So we want to make our businesses able to thrive without us. But yet so many organizations do not have a succession plan, and they don't have an exit plan. And we probably should talk about the distinction between the two. Yep. Oh, and let's see your cat. Is that your cat?
Yes.
Put here. There he is. Hi. What's his name?
His name is Mr. Bates for Downton Abbey.
Mr. Bates.
But the problem is he's not quiet like Mr. Bates.
Well, he's welcome to be part of the show. So you can have him on your lap there. So let's talk about that. So back to the question, which is, why do so few organizations have succession plans in place that's written down and formalized?
I think a lot of it has to do with the owner. And that, the owner is fearful. Really, I mean, they would never admit it, but they have, they built their business, their life has revolved around the business, and they don't have a plan for after the business. And I talk about that in the book. That's one of the big roadblocks, is, hey, if you're as a business owner, if you don't understand what life looks like after you sell, then you're less likely to really be driving that succession plan. And the succession plan should be something that is ongoing. It's not like an exit plan. Succession planning is all around making sure you've got the right people in the right seats at the right time. And that means you need to be integrating that succession plan with your annual planning. And so it should be a refreshed every year. And that's something that a lot of companies, smaller companies, do not do.
Right. They're not writing it down. It's in their head. And if it's in your head, it's not really a plan.
Right.
You're not going to be held. You're not holding yourself accountable to it, and no one else is holding you accountable to it. So that's really important. And there's a lot of transitions happening in the marketplace. We hear about, the high profile ones, Jeff Bezos and others. So, but there's also this, there's retirement, some people retiring, some people are starting other companies. They have that vision of what they want to do next, as you point out, which makes them more satisfied. But there's also a pretty frothy M&A market.
Yes.
So there's a lot of activity there too. And by the way, just to sort of mention, do you love the show Succession? Do you watch it?
You know what? I don't watch a lot of TV, to be honest.
Okay. Well, it's a really,
maybe I should check it out though.
Show. You should check it out because it is about this very high profile, successful family where they're doing lots of things wrong. So maybe that's what we'll do is if you come on a third time, we're going to dissect that show. Okay. We're going to ask, can that company be saved? Can the family be saved?
Okay.
All right. So we'll save that for another time. So if a company has a next generation, which could be a next generation of managers, or it could be related parties, it could be family, but they're not ready yet. what's an approach to bridge the gap from now to when they are ready?
Well, the first step is to really analyze what the gaps are. So you need to understand what your key positions are versus the key people, and determine, okay, are those key people in the key positions? And if so, what are those skills, behaviors that need to be developed so that they're ready in time for that next position? So a lot of my book is around development, and how do you make sure that you can identify your high potentials and make sure that you're developing them in a timely manner so that they're prepared. There's a lot of research, especially with millennials, that if they're not getting developed, they're going to leave. And the idea of a succession plan, if you can communicate that you've got a succession plan in your organization, you're not naming names. You're just saying, hey, we are committed to a succession plan, which means developing the people within the organization to be ready for when our company is larger, to take on more responsibilities. So you're not committing to stepping away. You're committing to your employees and developing them.
Is this something for companies that are a certain size that typically you see maybe 40 and above?
Right. Yeah. Usually I look at it as kind of the 30 employee and above. If you've only got 10 people, going through this process is going to be overkill. But if you've got 1,000 people or 5,000 people, this might be a little light, the process, especially when it comes to competencies and defining what competencies are critical to a position. Large companies will spend millions of dollars on competency models, and they will have to update them every year. What I do is I look at it as a competency ladder, and there's kind of two levels. The first is core competencies for your organization that all employees should have, and those competencies align with your values. So, if you've got a value, which you should have multiple values, what behaviors support those values? And then what are the competencies around those behaviors? And then there's a second level, and those are the leadership competencies. So I don't say, hey, go and create competencies for every job. It's competencies for single contributors and then leaders.
Gotcha. And this is typically the owner, the CEO, looking at his or her organization and from a top-down perspective.
Right.
Do you also see that, or do you get into conversations with people about their board and board succession?
I did not address that at all in this book. It's specifically around the organization itself.
Gotcha.
But you could, the board's a little different in the fact that you're not getting involved with their development, right? They're people from the outside. You could use some of the techniques that I talk about as it relates to board, like key positions, for instance. If you feel like you need somebody that's really connected to the financial world, or connected to some of your industry, well, obviously, if somebody's rolling off, you're going to want to replace them with something similar to that. But no, it's mostly around, it's the organization.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can work for organizations of a larger size where you have the
Yes.
depth and the bench. You
Yes.
can think of this skills matrix for your board or your board of
Yes.
advisors.
Yeah.
But then also, I think it's important to acknowledge that, this is a journey, right? You were saying that it is not a one and done.
Right.
But even in smaller organizations, I have a
Mhm.
client that is under 20 people. They're probably
Mhm.
15.
Uh-huh.
Have some really key lieutenants. And if those
Yep.
people left, they
Right.
would not have anyone in the organization who could step in.
Yeah.
So while we say that, there should be this, more formalized process, it's probably worth saying for the smaller organizations, especially if they are envisioning a transition in the future, they are going to have more of an acute problem because there's just less people.
Yes.
So it is pretty important there too, isn't it?
Yeah. Especially those key positions. Yeah. If you've got, a salesperson who has, strong relationships with your clients, if that person should exit, how are you going to keep those relationships without them, disappearing with your salesperson, right? Now, granted, you can have all the legal paperwork related to that individual not taking your clients, et cetera, but eventually that will run out. And you might have a year or two, but you really need to be careful from a risk perspective of those key employees leaving. So, if you've got 10 people, for instance, well, one of the things you can do is cross train, so that you've got some sort of backup. But yeah, I mean, the smaller the organization, the riskier it is.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the idea around the connection and the difference between succession planning and exit planning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in your story, as you laid out, there's some paths these characters are taking.
Yeah.
And I guess in real life too, and I know these characters are probably based on some amalgamation of clients that you've had or
Yes.
people that anonymized, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
And when it comes to exit planning and being able to create that vision for, as an owner, what your life might look like after the sale or after you've retired from your business, either way, right? Exit in the sense of you're not part of the company anymore. Why do you think it's so difficult for people to think about what's next?
The unknown. They haven't experienced it in the past. I think that there are some individuals that are more prone to looking into the future, while there are others that are more about the here and now. So those individuals that look more into the future and have a good support system around them. So if they're already involved, for instance, with some other activities, they could get more involved with those activities, right? The people that have lived so much for their company are the ones that have a harder time letting go, at least in my experience. The individual, Dan, in the book, Dan is somebody who had some activities, but didn't have as much time to do them. So he expanded those. And then his personal situation was changing, where he was becoming a grandfather. So he wanted to spend more time. So there was a personal reason for that as well. And he was just very committed to making sure that not only was the exit good for him, but for his key employees as well. So that, he had a very nice cash windfall, but his key employees also benefited from the sale as well.
Yeah, and I have the same ethos of when I work with clients that we need to talk about the business readiness. We need to talk about the personal readiness.
Yes.
And a lot of times the personal readiness is sort of the afterthought, but I try to bring it forward, because if they're talking with me, they probably already have decided at some level that they want to start preparing their business for sale, or preparing it for let's say an internal succession, or some sort of exit on the other side, right? What's coming in next 3 years, 5 years, or 1 year can happen too. And we do have an assessment, and you probably have tools too, but like we use an assessment where we call it the pre-score, which is a personal readiness to exit. And it boils it down into different attributes, like 4 key drivers. And so they dovetail very nicely with what you're saying. And we can measure where are they in that continuum of readiness, and then talk about an action plan. What are those questions they need to be exploring? I have a husband and wife that are clients, and the husband's the owner of the business, but the wife works in the business. And of course, she's involved day to day. And she's sort of leaning towards being more ready than he is. For some reasons. And it's been interesting to have that conversation too. And so a lot of times I think the value that advisors can have with a client that's contemplating is being able to draw out these uncomfortable, uncertain kinds of things. Like, we're not a therapist, right? We're not a licensed therapist, but a lot of it is fear too, right? We're getting older, or fear of change. So this kind of squishy place, this uncertain place. I think it is valuable to have a book like yours to be able to have the time to explore, right? But it's also helpful to talk to someone.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, most of my work is asking the questions that they've never asked themselves, or they've asked themselves, but it's never been in the forefront of their mind. So, and it gets them to self-reflect on, what could be versus what is.
Well, I guess just share a little high level about the book. You talked about the characters in the book, but I know you also have a lot of tools in here.
Yes.
So maybe just give the cliff notes if possible. If someone wants to find your book, and what would be a good reason for them to go get it on Amazon or wherever they're going to buy it?
Well, I think if you're a business owner, whether you're 40 years old or 60 years old, it really doesn't matter as it relates to succession planning. Succession planning is not just about you and your company, but it's about the people internally. And if you are focused on creating a path for the company, as well as creating a path for the employees, hopefully that will increase retention. And right now we've got a huge talent war going out there. I mean, worse than we ever had in the last 10, 15 years. And we've been talking about talent war for a long time, but it's really, I mean, when I talk to business owners now, the 2 things they talk about as the biggest challenge are talent and supply chain. So if the employees know that there's a succession plan, and that they're being developed as part of that plan, you're more likely to retain them for a longer period of time.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. I think that's a really good point about millennials.
Yes.
Millennials tend to be mission driven and purpose driven. And you talked about tying core values to behaviors. I was just with a client over the last couple of days doing strategic planning. And while this company is not a new company, they're not a startup, they've been around over 10 years, they've had different versions of core values. And you know what happens there? People start to do eye rolls.
Yeah, right. Like, exactly.
Like, yes. Oh no, there's not more again. Core values, not again.
Right.
And so with this leadership team, which is a younger team, in terms of tenure, not necessarily age, but tenure, it was really important to talk about that. How do we bring these values to life? And we talked about that as an example of,
Right.
okay, with your people, you're going to look for the behaviors and identifying when someone is kind of out of expectations. You
Right.
now have something to come back to, and
Yes.
using it in succession planning is such a powerful way to demonstrate why they
Yes.
matter.
Yeah. And I also, in the book, I have a chapter on hiring, because eventually you are going to have to hire people externally, because you don't have a person to succeed another person for some reason. And to integrate those core values and behaviors into the interview process, so that you're getting the right people on the bus.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, is there anything else about the book that you'd like us to know?
I think that, I tried to condense it, meaning it's a lot of how to. There is a story, but it's really a lot of how to. So if you are somebody who is, going through business planning right now and want to include succession planning in the process, this is a great book to use. It will help you to determine whether you're ready for succession planning. Do you have the infrastructure? And if not, how do you fill those gaps while you're developing a succession plan? Because there are things like, development plans. There are a lot of small companies that don't do development plans and don't have career conversations. But those are things that you could easily create as part of your succession planning process.
Yeah, and let's talk about the big why. Before I ask you for your favorite quote, we're going to talk about the big why. And the big why here is you will have more peace of mind, and probably if you're going to continue to run your business for the next 10 years, 15 years, having the bench of people around you, the processes to support you as a business owner, is not only going to make your company more valuable, but it'll probably make your work-life balance more happy.
Right, exactly.
Be happier in that environment. And then also that bigger picture of creating more enterprise value, I think is certainly, to underscore in Simon Sinek, start with why. That's the biggest.
Yes.
That's the biggest one. So I love to ask everyone, and because you've been on the show, you've already shared a favorite quote. So now I've asked you to choose a different quote.
Yes.
What is a quote you'd like to share?
So I have quotes in my book. So the one that I wanted to use today is from Peter Drucker. And it's, to be a manager requires more than a title, a big office, and other symbols of rank. It requires competence and performance of a high order.
Competence of a high order.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So if my son doesn't take out the trash, I can say he does not have competence of a high order.
Yes.
I'm going to use that. I like that. Peter Drucker. Yeah. And I thank you very much for including me in the book. You asked me to do an acknowledgement of it, and I really appreciate that. So, again, if people pick it up, you'll see a quote from me in there in the beginning. And I do think it's a really valuable read. I do encourage everyone to check it out, and it'll help give you some tools, a how to, as Beth said. And also, if folks want to find this, what's a great way to get in touch with you or to find the book?
Right. Well, the book is on Amazon. So just type in Replaceable, an Obsession with Succession, and you'll find it there. It's both a soft copy as well as a hard copy. And then to find me, you can find me on my website, which is executive-velocity.com, or on LinkedIn. And you would put in Beth Connect Miller. I think there's a bunch of Beth Millers.
We all have our uniqueness.
That's right, exactly.
Well, one of the other things, and Beth, we talked before we started recording, I'm a little bit apprehensive to say this and share it, but you're giving me the courage to do so. I am going to write a book as well. And I have not officially said it, but now I'm saying it on air and everyone's going to hear me saying it. And so now I'm going to hold myself accountable to it. So I really appreciate you showing me the way that this is going to be. You make it look so easy. No, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Yes. Yeah. And if you ever need some tips on kind of the process, please reach out to me.
Absolutely. So more to come on that from me. But Beth, thank you so much for being on the show, talking about Replaceable, your book, An Obsession with Succession, and of course, sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it, Laurie.